stand. But I hope that my government would realize that this is simply a provocative action.
Western diplomats in Washington told the BBC that the previous confrontation with Iraq over the agriculture ministry was poorly handled and the United States had to try to regain the initiative. If the published reports are true, that process could begin tomorrow. Gavin Esler, BBC News, at the Republican Convention in Houston.
Within the last few minutes, President Bush has said he totally denies trying to pick a fight with Iraq, but he said he would not be deterred from doing whatever was necessary to make Iraq comply with UN ceasefire terms. Here, the government is sending a further £18 million worth of food aid to Somalia, where half the population is facing starvation. The move follows America's decision to mount a massive airlift to a country torn by civil war. According to the latest reports from Somalia, 30 people died when fighting broke out over a food convoy at Baydhabo. And for the first time, the Somali government has admitted that the civil war has put the country out of control. BBC News will have the first 3 special reports from Somalia starting on Breakfast News tomorrow morning. Our correspondent George Alagaya has been to some of the remote villages. Later in the week, he'll be looking at the problems of distributing aid in the midst of civil war. That's Somalia, a special report starting on Breakfast News on BBC One at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. A United Nations convoy that was trapped after delivering relief supplies to the besieged town of Gorazde is now nearing Sarajevo on its return journey. French troops went to the rescue after the convoy was stopped by mines on a bridge on the River Pracha, a few miles outside the town. Here, the government is still to decide whether British troops should be sent to guard humanitarian aid for the former Yugoslav republics. The Prime Minister, who will interrupt his Spanish holiday for talks in London on Tuesday, is awaiting reports on the situation, according to the Foreign Office Minister Douglas Hogg. Speaking on The World This Weekend on Radio 4, he said, "We certainly haven't excluded the possibility of a British military presence." Here, grassroots Conservatives have put forward a number of unusually critical motions for the party conference in October. They show that the government still faces hostility over Europe, and there's serious concern too about economic policy.
Conservative Central Office is used to receiving a minority of critical motions. This year, though, the language of the criticism is surprisingly strong. The continuing recession has provoked grassroots demands for a change of policy. One motion says Europe's exchange rate mechanism is having a devastating impact on businesses and employment. Another, from Thurrock in Essex, which fell to Labour at the election, calls for interest rates to be slashed. The government's argument that rates must stay high to bear down on inflation is openly dismissed.
That may well be so, but I'm not sure that inflation is necessarily the #1 priority of the government. Many firms have large debts and loans, and inflation isn't always a bad thing for them. Perhaps we should concentrate on cutting interest rates so firms can start taking people on instead of laying them off, and then concentrate on inflation.
Last year's conference came before what John Major regarded as his great triumph in the negotiations at Maastricht. But with the treaty in trouble, Tory opponents of the deal are mustering their forces for this year's gathering in October. Ministers will argue that they're in tune with the party's hostility to a federal Europe, but they'll still have to work hard to convince many of their supporters that Lady Thatcher was wrong to call Maastricht a treaty too far. The Conservative hierarchy's iron grip on the conference means that none of the highly critical motions will actually be debated. But it's already clear that what many here had hoped would be a triumphal gathering after the general election victory will actually prove a much more difficult affair for John Major and his team.
Shane and Bernadette Cooley, now reunited with their kidnapped baby Farah, are tonight back home in London. Irish police say the woman arrested near Limerick in connection with the abduction has been under immense psychological pressure. She's been released while the authorities decide whether to prosecute her.
The happy moment which Bernadette and Shane Cooley had been praying for came after 48 agonising hours. Reunited, the family invited the world to share their joy.
She was asleep and I was afraid to wake her up, but I just had to. And she's healthy and she's happy and she's just had a bottle. And we're just so pleased to see her. She woke up, I think, just wondering what's going on for a while, but then when we got her in our arms, she just started. It's just,
Still shaken despite the delight, the family left for much-needed rest before beginning their journey back home, carrying with them the good wishes of everyone whose hearts had been touched by Farah's plight. The farming country to which Farah was abducted is a closely knit community where the new arrivals were soon noticed. Police tracked them down to this house, owned by the young woman's parents. The woman herself is understood to be the mother of twins, now in foster care. Police allowed her to go free after questioning. They say she's under immense pressure.
The Director of Public Prosecutions was contacted, and having discussed the matter with one of the investigating officers, a direction was given that the girl should be released.
Under Irish law, she's under no obligation to keep them informed of her whereabouts, nor does she need to report regularly, and she's free to travel in the Irish Republic and abroad. Chris West, BBC, Limerick.
Tonight in Dublin, baby Farah was determined that she was going to share in the celebrations and the champagne. As she faced the cameras once again, she opted for the police commissioner's hat rather than her toys. He didn't seem to mind. Her parents were thankful she'd been so well looked after.
She has looked after her, so we're very grateful for the abductor being the right abductor, if there is such a thing.
Once they knew she was in Ireland, they were confident she'd be found.
Because I'm Irish myself, and I just felt more comfortable that she was on Irish property or on Irish land, and it was just in my heart. I just felt it in my heart.
At her home in East London, flowers and presents have been arriving from well-wishers. Her grandparents have been celebrating since word came from Ireland that she'd been found.
Oh, we were over the moon. We just, everybody in the room, we just jumped out, cried out, everything.
I feel happy. It's the best day of our lives, really, the best day of our lives.
And within the past hour, the family's return. For relatives and friends, the waiting was over. And 3 days after she disappeared, Farah was finally home.
Now golf, Britain's Nick Faldo has staged a fighting comeback in the final round of the US PGA Championship. He picked up 4 birdies to finish on 3 under par. But with the leaders still out on the course, that's unlikely to be good enough to give him the title. Faldo was unrecognisable from the player who struggled so badly yesterday, suddenly rediscovering his touch around the greens. But though he's the leader in the clubhouse, Zimbabwe's Nick Price is looking a more likely winner. A short while ago, he was 6 under par with 3 holes to play. The highlights are on BBC Two at 11:25. Middlesex have won cricket's Sunday League title for the first time. Chasing 195 to beat Yorkshire at Uxbridge, Middlesex were indebted to an aggressive innings by their all-rounder John Carr. They won by 5 wickets to take an unassailable 12-point lead in the Sunday League table. And the main news again. Britain's Nigel Mansell has become the World Formula One motor racing champion. And you can see a special programme tomorrow night on BBC One at 10:10. Nigel Mansell, world champion. But that's the BBC News tonight. Good night.